So, good afternoon. My clock is showing 2 p.m. So I think it's good time to start. Welcome. And welcome for a session about communication and international communication, especially. This webinar is especially geared towards small businesses that have great and international ambitions if they want to go international. And on the agenda today, we basically have very short introductions about our speakers today, which I'm one of them. And then we have 5 questions that we think you should ask and also get answered when you are aiming for international growth. Then we have a quick question and answer session, and we would be happy to have your questions as well. And then Pauliina will be talking about a 2-day international communication training program that is available for you. And we really hope to see you joining for that later on. Okay, so let's start. With you today, we have Pauliina Rasi. Pauliina is currently living abroad in Switzerland, and she is a content strategist and copywriter, and she likes to say that she really works with businesses and projects that have mighty missions. I am from Ahjo Communications, and I work as a communication strategic and mainly with thought leadership as a strategic business model and communications model. And I also love to work with great ambitions. We both have international background. Both of us have lived abroad for many years, and that's also one of the reasons why we are here today. So just to get you all warmed up, we would like to hear from you. What is your biggest challenge in international communications? And if you use the chat, Pauliina will be happy to pick up some of your questions or points. So what is your biggest challenge in international communication? Don't be shy. Go ahead. Let's see what you get on the chat.
Yeah, so localization has been brought up, which is a tricky one indeed, knowing how to adapt to a local market. We will be talking about that shortly as well. And I'm not sure if this silence means that you don't even know where to start with, but if that's the case, that's all right as well. It's often, that's also why we framed today's webinar around the questions to ask and answer, because sometimes it can really be hard to know where to even start.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so let's start with the question number 1. What is the bigger picture? This is the question that you should be able to answer. This is the question you should be able to ask from your investors, from your board, from the team that you're teaming up with. This is the number 1 question. And don't even dream of going international unless you know what is the bigger picture. So understanding what is happening in the world, understanding how you relate to what is happening in the world and what is wrong in the world is basically what forms your purpose. It basically what forms your mission. So what are you going to do to help, for example? And the idea of purpose is a key to clear business communication. It all starts with a great business strategy. So business strategy has to be there first, and then all of the communication builds on that business strategy. Where we are at the moment is that this is how the world looks like. We are so used to being bombarded with different kinds of messages throughout the day. People even count them up to 30,000 per day. And some of them are commercial, some of them are not, and so forth. But it's a lot about understanding what you should communicate and how you should communicate it. And where we are at the moment is that research shows that all corporations and companies are losing the game. They are not seen as interesting or as human or as relevant as people are. So what this means for a company basically is that the CEOs need to be activists. CEO need to take a stand. This we can see from research once again, that the younger generations, they really adapt to companies that have something to say, that have a stronger purpose, and that have a really great purpose to help the society in all of these biggest issues and biggest problems that we are facing as a humanity. So you really need to think this through, that this is a human to human communications time. Even if you are in the business to business business, you basically need to think about what triggers people and what is important to people. And when you are able to tap on these needs and these motivations, that is when you find your clear communications. So answer these questions. What is your purpose? What do you dream of? How has the world changed when you have reached your vision? How are you helping, and what wave are you riding? And can you say that what you are doing can also be looked upon so that it is transparent and authentic? Because this is what the digital world is all about. Anybody can basically hijack your Facebook or your Twitter, and they can come up with disinformation and so forth. But you need to be there, and you need to be through and through honest and authentic about what you're communicating. You cannot claim to be something you are not. This is the world we are living in. What we also know from people and research of people and their behavior is that people really relate to the bigger purpose. They really want to understand what is the why behind why you do these things. So ask yourself, why do I do this thing? Why is my company, why did I started my company? Who are we as founders? What is our value base? What do we believe in? And when you tap on this, then you are able to meet people on an emotional level. And you really need to meet people on an emotional level if you want to do world-class communications. And always remember that in all of us, and in the core of humanity, in core of us humans, is the need of belonging. We really want to belong. We want to belong to something bigger than us. We want to be part of a community. And that is the societal impact that you can have. And you can tap on that. And that is when you get somebody else to talk for you and on your behalf. So when you're building thought leadership, this is about being bold. So forget about being too modest. And sometimes Finnish companies, they might have this problem that we are all too modest and we think about the technical details and we still can't sell. And that was even in Kauppalehti today, in one of the news today. So what is wrong with us? We need to tap on what makes people tick and what is the sales audience, or what is the audience that we want to communicate with. And it all starts with the roots. So here, as a metaphor, use the tree. This is very, very easy model to play with. So if you grow a tree, you need to plant it in a good, fertile soil. And then what you need are good roots, because otherwise the tree just won't stick to the weather, it won't stick to the competition, it just won't stick to the winds. So the mission, what is your purpose, the vision of the world, how it's going to look like, and the values that you're working with, that is the basement. That is the foundation of everything. And that becomes a healthy tree when it grows into the trees. And when you open that growth and that discussion and your way of working and the why you are working into a broader audience, and you open it up for an open dialogue, that is when you build strong alliances. You find the people who will like your actions, and you will find people who will give recommendations for you. That is how you grow. And eventually, when you are growing, you also have to measure and adapt. So you will have to be able to come up with some kind of measurement for what are we doing? Is this sensible of doing it like this? Should we do this again? How should we adapt? And then you just keep on growing, and you keep growing new trees. But this is a very, very simple way of thinking how thought leadership could be built. It's a long-term project. We are willing to actually cultivate a forest here, not just only one tree. So a couple of examples who've done this pretty beautifully is, for example, Oatly, and the other one is Green Planet Astronauts. They are both in the food industry. And if you think about food industry, it's one of the biggest advertising industry in the moment, and also in Finland, one of the biggest, and also in export, it's one of the biggest. So if you find the bigger change that you are part of, just like Oatly has done, for example, then advocate for it. Go boldly for it and really see the change and be part of it. That's also what Muhammad Gandhi used to say, be part of the change that you want to be. And then the other thing about communications is that you have to be different or you are just wasted. So when you are competing in an international marketplace, it's a completely different kind of ball game, and you have to be really, really good at from the get-go already that you know what you're saying and that you can tell people that this is the authentic thing that you're going to get. Save the world and entertain. That's also one of the ways of communicating. It doesn't suit everyone, but remember that people want to be entertained as well. And sometimes this can be quite surprising how even in the B2B communications, this could work as one of the chosen paths. What I want to show you is Oatly's position. Oatly's positioning looks like this. It's very simple. In the other end, you are either fucking fearless, and on the other end, which Oatly doesn't want to be, is scared shitless. And they say that 90% of all companies are basically on that side. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to stop thinking like a company, and that's basically what they're saying. We are not a company, we are people. And the other is either evil or good. And they want to work for the good. They want to work for the good of the planet. And that's what they've been signaling and communicating from the get-go. And it's a Swedish company in the middle of nothing. And they also have a CEO who is a bit cuckoo, probably, but also very wise, because he's using this quirkiness and he's being very authentic about it. There's no marketing department in Oatly. There's only researchers. There's only producers of good oat milk and products. And then they want to sell them and make it happen internationally. And since the cause is so big and since the dream is so big, it's working. The business case is amazing. Another company that has done this beautifully and especially about differentiating. This is Kyrö Distillery from Pohjanmaa in Finland. They are carrying out these communications, which is fantastically different. It's bold, it's courageous, and it's also a bit quirky once again. So they are also taking the Finnish mentality and playing with it, making it sound something rather exotic and something that other people would look at like, wow. So a small company from Pohjanmaa has been able to come up with one of the world-class products in gin products. And when they were fit, or for example, when they're hit with the COVID-19 situation, they didn't really think twice when they thought about what could we do. And they went into the disinfectionary business. So they started to sell these infections. And that is also something that saved their business during COVID-19 virus situation. So for all of you, the first question should be the biggest question. What is the bigger picture? Please answer that. And now I give it to you, Pauliina. Go ahead.
Thank you, Eva. And also on my behalf, welcome to everybody. It's so great to see you all here. And I'm excited to dive into the next question, if we can. Yes. So number 2 this would be how to get your message across. When you start with those foundations that Eva explained to you, that what are your values, what are your missions, what are the roots that you're building your tree on, the next question should be about the message and how to get that message across to your new audience. Because even when we are moving to another country and we might be going after similar audience in terms of demographics, age, gender, there might still be important differences as well. And it's important to dive into those before taking the jump and to really understand what your audience looks like in that other country or the other countries. What is the market in general there? Does your audience know the products as well as your audience maybe does in Finland, or maybe even better? Maybe they have more requirements, maybe they have higher quality standards. It's important to understand those details before actually jumping to the communication. And the bigger picture that Eva talked about, that doesn't necessarily change so much, but sometimes the local conditions can be so different that the message needs to be sent and delivered in a different way. And another thing to think about is also whether your audience actually changes when you move abroad or go international. Typically, for example, that can also be a phase where the investors get involved. And then again, a message to investors might be very different than the message to the customers, even though, of course, the bigger picture, the vision might stay the same. But investors and consumers, for example, or even B2B audience, they care about different things, and that should be taken into account in your communication as well. And then we can move over to question number 3, which is one of the most common ones that I usually get from international businesses or from businesses who start having international ambitions. And it's a question of language. Which language to use? And it is a tricky one, because even though English is so predominant these days, it's not necessarily the language that the audience feels most at ease with. Again, it comes back to knowing the market, knowing the audience, but the language question shouldn't be overlooked. Especially when going to new markets, you might be competing with some local brands who are already known to the audience, who already communicate them in their language and in a way that they are used to. And cutting to that is not necessarily very simple. And I'm not saying here that you should use English or you shouldn't use English internationally. It's not really a simple question to answer, but it's definitely something that should be considered carefully. It's not a very light-hearted question to answer at the end. To illustrate this, I can share a personal example, or actually a couple of examples. We can skip to the next slide. Yes, so iTunes and Uber, which are both very international brands. I live in Switzerland, and when I first moved here, well, it's been a while now, I was so furious with iTunes, because Switzerland is a dominantly German-speaking country. However, we live in the French-speaking part in Western Switzerland, and iTunes back at the time was really convinced that people only speak one language in one country. And since we were living in a German-speaking country, they just pushed German-speaking content to us. And well, it was infuriating because I don't even speak German, but still, even if I did, I might want to consume content in other languages as well. So making that kind of assumptions can be really dangerous, because then you might lose that momentum that you have in the new markets if people don't really find you, or they don't feel at ease with your brand, if you force upon them a language that they don't actually want to speak or listen or consume your services in. However, Uber, when they came to a market here a couple of years ago, they did it all differently. They came directly using the local languages. Of course, I admit countries like Switzerland, they are a little bit painful, because you have 4 languages to take into account, and still you have 20% of population who is foreign, so might want to use English or yet another language when consuming the services. But still, Uber went through all that, and their app was translated in French, their ads were translated in French, all the content marketing they sent to me via email is French speaking, and it's helped a lot when they want people really to adapt to new habits, and it's helped them to find their place amidst other more local and maybe more adapted services that consumers were already familiar with. So language cannot be scaled. It needs to be considered for each case separately, and well, in some countries even several times. However, remember also that there are two different things. There's the language of communication and the language of company that is used internally. So if many growing companies choose to use English as a company language because it makes international communication easier within teams, when there are teams in several locations, etc. So even though the communication and content and marketing are adapted to the local languages, it doesn't need to say that everybody in company offices, for example, speaks local languages. The official company language can still be English, for example. And like Eva said in the beginning, if you have any questions, even throughout the presentation, just hit the chat. We make sure to have time for those in the end as well. But if there's something that comes to mind when we are going through a presentation, don't hesitate. Okay, then to the question number 4. Something to consider early on as well is what can you do on your own and what you can't do on your own. And making these choices strategically will help a lot, of course, in understanding the local market, if that's a market you don't know that well to begin with, but also to get your message across more quickly. It can save a lot of rounds of trial and error when these things are thought of in beforehand. And of course, here as well, there aren't really one size fits all, but understanding your own strengths and the needs of a market will help make these decisions. Like typically, let's say you decide to go with the local language when it comes to content marketing, communications, in place, advertisement, having local content creation support can be really useful because they already understand the market, they understand the finesse of the language and how the language is used in the country, if it's more formal or if it's more conversational. I remember again one more Swiss example when IKEA came and they started using tu, which is the less formal you in the French language. It was a scandal. Like, how can they speak to us like that? And especially older consumers really felt uncomfortable with that. But well, that was a strategic choice. I'm not saying it was a mistake. It was a strategic choice. But being able to make those choices requires in-depth understanding of the culture and the language that is used. And then another typical example that we often see outsourced locally are PR and media relations, because again, those require the knowledge of a local culture, networks that will take time to build. So those are a couple of examples where the outsourcing can really be useful and help you shortcut to success in the early stages. And then to the 5th and final question of our tour today, how exactly to adapt to the local conditions. And here it comes back to the audience. Of course, it comes back to questions like choosing your communication channels and where you actually show up. Different social media channels, for example, can be used a little bit differently in different countries. The demographics might change. Of course, there are many international trends as well, but understanding the local differences is important here. The language and how to adapt the content and the message to local conditions is, of course, important to understand as well. And then also understanding the markets and the different market forces, because in some way, a similar audience in another country can be very different, or it can be very similar, but the thing is that it's impossible or difficult to know if when you start, if you don't really put in some time and effort to figure it out. For example, in the United States, the young consumers have a lot more consumption power than the Finnish teens and young people, for example. And it's something to take into account. At the same time, even when we are talking about different subcultures or smaller demographic groups, they can actually be very similar from one country to another. So understanding who you are going after, what are the problems, what is that bigger picture, what are you solving for them, and what can they identify with? Understanding all that when executing campaigns is really vital as well. So it all takes us to this first question, that human to human part that actually doesn't change in communication. So it's at the same time complicated and simple, but it really comes back to this basic understanding of consumers, of the market, and what is the problem that you are solving? What is the bigger mission that you are trying to achieve?
Great. Thank you, Pauliina.
Thank you.
I think that was the last one. And now
Yes.
we hope to be able to answer some questions and go about.
Okay, so what different methods would you recommend to be used in order to get to know other markets? Do you want to start with that, Eva? I can then complement if there's something to add.
Okay. So this was a question from the audience?
Yes.
Okay. There are different ways of understanding different markets. I think the main important thing here is that you, for example, carry out a research on your particular market, for example, that relates to your product or your services that you are about to bring to the market. There's also a lot of ready-made researches that can be found already. So I think research is one of the basic key components here, that you really understand where you're going and what is your audience, what is the local market like, what is the local media landscape like. That is also a good way of understanding what do other companies and other actors in the market do when you actually look into the media. So a media survey, a media analysis is always recommended as well. Pauliina, do you have something else?
Well, from content perspective and also through different channels in the early stages in new markets, they can also be used as a part of this research. Like once, well, you probably want to conduct some in-depth research before going to a market, but when you start setting up your channels and growing that audience, asking questions, getting engaged with your followers, the early followers, it can be really useful because it's also good content per se to ask questions, to test ideas. But at the same time, those first followers, they will feel very committed, very engaged, and they might become your brand ambassadors in the new country as well. I hope that answered your question, but keep them coming if there's anything more you would like to ask. Or just even share your observations, what has worked or hasn't worked for you as well, because we learn a lot from each other's stories as well.
So Pauliina, did you have any other questions? I remember you.
There's nothing coming in the chat. But well, maybe if we are waiting for a while, is there something, what would you say, Eva, where would you start? What would be the very first move to make, even when starting to plan the move, the international move?
I think for very many Finnish companies, what we've seen currently and what we've worked with is that they want to take the world. They want to go digital, and they have services that are built on platforms. So basically they can take the whole world. But of course you have to start from a certain market, and very often that is the near markets to Finland. So very often it's Sweden, or it can be the Baltic region, or it could even be Russia. And any of these markets are big ones. So big ones in the sense that you have to understand the market as it is and how it is. And I think language is one of these issues, definitely. And then that you would start going international, I think that has to do with your capabilities. It has to do with the strategic vision. Are we up to this? Because a lot of the companies burn money in going international and then they come back because it doesn't work out. So I think it actually starts a lot with the purpose and the key messaging. And what are you solving? Whose problems are you solving? How relevant are you to that market?
Absolutely. And when you brought up the services like different SaaS platforms or different digital services and products, it's also important to think about how well known that kind of product is to that new market. Are they familiar with buying something like that? Because what can happen, especially with B2B products or with more complicated services, is that if people aren't used to buying that, they don't know how to buy from you. And it will make digital sales complicated, especially in the early stages. So it's something to really think about and look at closely.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's another question in the chat about the press, to how to go forward with press abroad. And it's a great question, and that's a tough one as well. Like I said earlier, there's a challenge of not having the networks, maybe not knowing which are the relevant titles and how to get started with that. Well, the media analysis that Eva mentioned earlier is, of course, a good starting point. There are really two ways. The quicker one, but that requires a bit more budget, is finding a local PR collaborator or PR agency, because they typically have the relationships, they know the titles, you can get your message through a bit more quickly. But of course, that requires some budget and also some background research to find the perfect partner, maybe some trial and error there. The other one, which is budget friendlier but slower, is to start building those relationships. And it comes back to the same question of understanding what is the problem you are solving and really seeing the press relations as a way of serving the press. So what kind of valuable content can you offer them? Why would they want to hear from you? I have background in journalism myself, so this is kind of one of the topics that sparks me. But really seeing, like, sometimes I say to clients that actually your company interests no one. And I don't say that to be mean at all. But journalists and media, they are bombarded with these different messages every day. So really to cut through that, you need to find something that serves them, that's genuinely novel. And finding those points, it requires some time as well, but it's really background work worth doing. Would you like to add something to that, Eva?
Yeah, I'm also thinking that for example, if you're going abroad from Finland, there are PR agencies just like us, for example, Ahjo. We help companies go abroad because we work through networks ourselves. So you can have your hub in Finland. We can speak our language. It's always easier to speak your mother tongue. And then we set the strategy straight. And then we, as the agency, we take care of the network liaisons and the network strategy and so forth. So that's also one very useful way of doing it. If you don't have anybody there in the local country, or then you can of course ask Pauliina to help.
Absolutely, and finding those connections, building those connections through through an agency or someone you already know, it helps, because then they know your message and what you are about already. So it's a great tip.
And I think also one of the things is that the PR might even be easier abroad than what it is in Finland. And I have personal experience, for example, from Sweden, where the media was calling me and asking whether we have some news. And I was flabbergasted, because that never happened in Finland when I was working on the other side, so to say. So that also means that when the media landscape is broader, and when, for example, the trade magazines are broader than what we have in Finland, you might have ample opportunities of getting and being heard.
Absolutely, and there can be some novelty value in being a Finnish company in the market as well. So don't forget about that.
Yeah.
The next question in the chat is, if you if you're a Finland-based company and have only channel and dealers in different markets, how would you organize your international communications and how to build thought leadership in that case? That's a good one. You want to start Eva?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about the scale once again. I would always go for the local solutions as well. So to have a good communications team, so that the hub is somewhere, and then you would have excellent communicators in those different markets. That's a key, I think, because you have to be able to communicate locally. You have to be able to be relevant locally, even though you have the so-called corporate messages. But I would definitely say that build a good team around core capabilities. It's all about the local knowledge. It's all about the local connections as well. So I wouldn't, for example, be sending a lot of Finnish-speaking people abroad if that is not necessarily what is needed. Sometimes they are fantastic there, and if they have the local knowledge, they can be fantastic, but very often it's better to recruit in the country.
Absolutely. And well, we've been talking a lot about building up the teams and building up the capabilities, but what would you say, Eva, in terms of timelines? Like, how much time would that building up take?
Well,
one size fits all answer.
Yeah. Well, if you think about very roughly, I think when you recruit a new person, and if that person is really into what you're doing and is very eager to learn, then it takes about 3 months or up to 6 months, depending on the complexity of what you're selling and what your services is. But I would say from up to 3 months, and then after that, it shouldn't be a problem. But just also, I would say, avoid complexities. Make it a streamlined way of communicating internally as well, because the internal communications can be a hinder here. So it shouldn't be a problem, and you should feel like you are close and you have the common goals, but then you also trust the local units, that they also have the power to make decisions locally.
Definitely. And also giving some freedom and really listening to those local entities and local people, because they are experts in that country, in that region as well.
Because I can give an example. We have quite a lot of companies approaching us and telling that Finland is a very particular market, and it's a small market. It's not a tier 1 market, or it's not the key market for them, but they would still like to understand how we could, for example, build brand here, or what kind of campaigns would work here. So it is exactly like that, how one should go about it. Be very humble about it, that we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to learn. We want to understand better. And when we understand better, then we are able to execute better.
Absolutely. But now actually that you brought up the companies that come to Finland, I'm keen to know, what are they struggling with? What are those specificities of the Finnish market that foreign international companies struggle with?
Well, basically, they are always the same problematics. It's that we are not so well known. We are seeing, or we are definitely, I think it's because of our language, that it is not a Scandinavian language, and it is a very odd language when you look upon it from the European perspective, or even EMEA perspective. And it's not more stranger than Bulgarian or any other language, but it just feels that way. And also we are very close to Russia, so there's a lot of things that people might think very wrongly about us, and who we are and where we come from and what is our heritage and so forth. So it's a lot about questions of what are the demographics and what works here, and then our media landscape is so much smaller, and it's very factual, and Finns I would say overall are quite fact-based nation. So when you come here, it can't be so much about the hooky-pooky and this kind of messaging. It has to be quite fact-based as well if you really want to gain some media attention here.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's Finland's closeness to Russia. It's actually, well, geographically speaking, closeness. It's actually a good reminder again of not make those assumptions.
Yes.
Because other countries have that kind of situations as well. Finland is much closer to the other Nordic countries or even Central Europe in many ways than
Exactly.
we are to Russia. So that kind of assumption could be lethal to a company coming to the Finnish market.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
If you have more questions, please keep them coming. We could maybe take a couple of minutes now to talk about the international communication training.
Yeah.
And also, of course, if you have questions about that, we are happy to answer. So we are opening the doors to a 2 days international communication training that allows you to find your answers to these questions that we talked about today. So really figuring out and fine-tuning that bigger vision and that bigger message to take into an international market, localizing it, getting started with those media relations that were asked about, how to work with local media, how to start building up your teams, and how to when to localize, when not, etc. So in this training, we will take a closer look and help you build your tailored international communication plan. It's a 2-day training. It's 2 half days, which means that there will be pre-work to get you started and get you thinking about these questions. The first day, when we go through more of a theory and find your answers, find your challenges and also your strengths, because I'm sure that many of you and your businesses, you already have a lot of natural strengths that can also be hard to see sometimes when you are too close to things. Then there's again work in between the days, and the second days looks at the plan that you started to develop and helps you fine-tune it so that you really have a well thought out game plan and you know what to do and how to get to that international success from the get-go, or ideally even earlier, before even starting, instead of running in circles and trying that costly and time-consuming trial and error method that we see so many companies struggling with. So the signups, it's not open for sign up yet. We have a wait list. So if you're keen to learn more, I will put the wait list link in the chat. So you can sign up your interest to learn more when the doors actually open. And also, well, if you have questions, please let us know in the chat. And you should also have our email address, I believe, from the emails we've sent you about this webinar. So you can, of course, email us and ask more questions as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pauliina. Okay, now there's still some time for your questions, and it looks like that we are able to finish a bit earlier today, so we don't want you to have these back-to-back meetings and back-to-back webinars. So if there's any questions, just please go ahead, take the mic or put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer still. Okay, sounds like a Finnish audience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We were productive and we got to chase and got it done with early ahead of schedule. So Finnish productivity is right there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, folks, for joining us today, and we hope that you will be able to join up for Pauliina's 2-day training course, and we hope that this has been useful for you. And we say thank you and cheerio. Good luck.
Thank you for joining. It was a pleasure to have you.